Hi, I'm Frank DeFord, and this year we celebrate a very special milestone in the sport of harness racing, the 75th anniversary of its greatest race. In the next hour, we'll look at the horses and the people and the compelling stories that have made this event a classic. Now, rarely does one individual determine the course of a sport, but such was the case with harness racing when a colt was foaled in Orange County, New York on May 5th, 1849. His name was Hambletonian. And today in North America, every harness horse traces pedigree to this single sire. And there was no question then that when it was created, the most important race in the sport should bear the name of its most important horse, the Hambletonian.
The namesake Hambletonian was found shortly after his birth with his mother, beneath a tree in the pasture on the farm of Jonas Seeley. The discovery was made by a hired hand, William Risdick, who grew so attached to the colt that Seeley agreed to sell him both the mare and the foal. Risdick had to go into debt to come up with the money, but he was so convinced that his fortune lay with the colt that he managed to get the loan and took his prized possessions down the road to his own small farm. The name that Risdick selected for his colt stemmed from a village in Yorkshire, Hambleton, which was the site of one of the most ancient race meetings in England. The colt was actually registered as Hambletonian 10. He was exceptionally well bred, a great-grandson of the thoroughbred champion, Messenger. And Risdick put Hambletonian to stud at the age of 2. Before he died 25 years later, in 1876, Hambletonian had been bred to over 1,900 mares, producing more than 1,300 foals. Not surprisingly, he was called Old Bull for these prodigious efforts, making Risdick a rich man. In today's dollars, Hambletonian's stud fees ranged as high as $5,000 a session, and he made as much as $200,000 a year. His progeny soon ruled the tracks. In the 1920s, 3 visionaries decided that harness racing needed a classic event. Harry Reno, a promoter, conceived the event as a futurity for 3-year-old trotters. John Bauer, who owned and published the magazine Horse Review, and his Grand Circuit reporter, Joseph Markey, enthusiastically supported the idea of such a race in print. Naming the race for the great father of the standardbred made the proposal that much more popular. And so it was that the industry was invited to bid for the rights to the inaugural Hambletonian. The sealed offers were opened on New Year's Day, 1926, and Syracuse won with an unprecedented purse of $70,000. A group of sponsors formed the Hambletonian Society. Their mission was to administrate the Hambletonian, a responsibility that continues to this day. A field of 14 faced the starter in that first Hambletonian on August 30th, 1926. Nat Ray drove Guy McKinney to victory for owner Henry B. Ray, no relation to the driver Nat. Mr. Ray returned home to Pittsburgh nearly $50,000 richer, carrying the tall silver trophy presented to him by Jimmy Walker, the mayor of New York City. In the next 3 years, the Hambletonian moved between Lexington, Kentucky and Syracuse. In 1929, an historic event occurred which has never been repeated. There were 8 entries in the race. Walter Cox trained 4 of them, and they finished 1, 2, 3, and 4, with Cox driving the winner, Walter Deer. Entrepreneur and promoter Bill Kane, the owner of Walter Deer, very much wanted to host the Hambletonian himself, and he had the required track in Goshen, New York. The formal announcement was made in February, and the Hambletonian was on its way to Goshen.
He spared no expense to turn Goodtime Park into a beautiful little oasis of rural tranquility, just an hour from New York City for that week, Hambletonian week.
26 Hambletonian winners, from Hanover's Bertha to The Intruder, were crowned at Kane's sprawling 3-corner track on the history-packed grounds once known as Fiddler's Green.
You could not walk. There were so many people there that you couldn't even wiggle. It was just wall-to-wall people. It was unbelievable.
And we would have crowds that simply didn't want to go back to their homes that night. And they would stay up and literally dance in the streets. They had flatbedded trucks with orchestras playing on the back of them for a dancing crowd. And that's how they entertained these people who came to town, and it was a simple life.
Goshen was recognized as the cradle of the trotter because so much of harness racing's earliest history was written there. It was the home of the sport's oldest trotting oval, historic track, which traces its beginnings back to 1838. The race belonged to Goshen, people said. But upon the death of Bill Kane, the contract to conduct the Hambletonian was once again up for grabs. The Hayes family of DuQuoin, Illinois, won the bid and carried on the Country Classic from 1957 through 1980, staging it at the DuQuoin State Fair, maintaining that special quality that sets the Hambletonian apart from all other races. Theirs was a magnificently staged event, raced where trotting had always been conducted for sport's sake.
W.R. Hayes was a pioneer of Illinois harness racing, and he had built a huge private estate in southern Illinois at DuQuoin. His 2 sons, Gene and Don, became deeply immersed in harness racing, and Gene became one of the outstanding figures in the sport.
There never was a more beautiful place to watch a horse race than DuQuoin. The Hayeses did a marvelous job. Very difficult place to get to, but never did a big race have a better setting, and everybody was treated like a king and a queen there.
Once you got there, you thought you'd died and gone to heaven because the setting for the racetrack was magnificent.
At night, they used to have wonderful shows, and I can remember going to see Nat King Cole, and evidently this was his last public appearance before he got ill, and afterwards he came down to the Hayes basement and played the piano most of the night, and I sat on the piano stool with him, and I was trying to stump him, and he was laughing, and we just had the best time. It was so wonderful.
They had the infield lake, they had water skiers out there. It was just flowers everywhere. It was just gorgeous.
In 1979, the Meadowlands racetrack, the world's premier harness track, bid to move the race from its rural roots to a metropolitan setting outside New York City.
Can you turn around? Turn around.
I think we impressed them with the operation we had, with the competence of the personnel that were going to be there, and the fact that the Hambletonian would now be in a setting of success. And that's what we sold, and that's what they bought.
The The Hambletonian Society awarded the race to the Meadowlands Racetrack in East Rutherford, New Jersey, beginning in 1981.
You're looking at a live shot of the Meadowlands Racetrack in East Rutherford, New Jersey, within sight of the skyscrapers of the Big Apple, New York City. It is the scene set for the 56th running of the Hambletonian, the most prestigious race in harness racing. Hello again, everyone. I'm Howard Cosell. Good to have you.
That 56th renewal of the Trotting Classic was won by Ray Remmen, driving Shiaway's St. Pat. Boasted a record purse of $838,000.
Super One is trying to hold on, and Shiaway St. Pat wants to run him down. Super One's got it ahead. Shiaway's up on the outside, and Shiaway is edging to the front.
I was interviewed by Howard Cosell, and there was more people asked me what it was like to be interviewed by Howard Cosell than asked me what it was like to win the Hambletonian.
You're a great young driver. Congratulations again, and thank you. Thank you very much.
With the transition to the Meadowlands in 1981, the Hambletonian has become a far more international event, attracting visitors from all over the world, still keeping a lot of its rural Americana roots, but actually gaining a larger audience by spreading the name of the Hambletonian around the world.
Big city notwithstanding, the Meadowlands retained the county fair atmosphere that was embraced by families and fans in Goshen and DuQuoin, and now in East Rutherford. In 1983, the purse of the Hambletonian reached the magic $1 million mark, where it remains today.
The Hambletonian was an instant classic. Each year, the quest for a trotter with speed, heart, and class became paramount in every owner's mind. And each year, the trainers strove to have their chargers in peak form and top condition as the day neared. Sharp driving ability and that intangible luck was also needed. It wasn't just the lavish purse or the valuable trophy that made a victory so desirable. It was the immediate prestige and the glory that came to be associated with that select number of trotters who bore the title Hambletonian winner.
The race has projected greatness, produced it, and predicted it during all of its 75 years. And along the way, it has vaulted some of its winners into the lofty realm of legendary. One such winner was Titan Hanover, a little thunderbolt who captured the classic in 1945. Pony-sized a year earlier when he became the first 2-year-old to trot a mile in 2 minutes, he was not much bigger when he won the Hambletonian. Titan inspired writers of the time to poetry in their attempts to describe him. The most renowned of those writers, John Hervey, was moved to this eloquence. Titan Hanover seems to throw himself into everything he does with every atom of his energy, to revel in his speed and strength. At full speed, he storms along, mane and tail flying like banners, eyes flashing and glittering. That's pretty strong stuff, but Titan delivered and beat 18 other trotters while carrying the historic colors of Arden Homestead Stable to the cherished Victory Lane at the end of World War II. In 1955, harness racing introduced its trotting Triple Crown, the Yonkers Futurity, later known as the Yonkers Trot, the Hambletonian, and the Kentucky Futurity. And from out of California came a comet that swept all three. He was trained by one of the sport's greatest horsemen, Joe O'Brien.
Of all of the great horses that Joe O'Brien had, including those that won the Hambletonian and those that didn't, he still thought that the greatest of all of them was the first Triple Crown winner, Scott Frost, in 1955. He loved that horse, although when he was training in the first stages of his 2-year-old form, he did not think he was that good. In fact, he had his second trainer train him a number of times. But when the horse started to come around in July, Joe suddenly realized that he had something very, very special on his hands.
O'Brien's young star won 9 races in 1954, but it was only a prelude to what lay ahead. In 1955, Scott Frost completely dominated the 3-year-old trotting division, winning 23 of 28 starts, including the Hambletonian, and was voted Horse of the Year. The next year, he won 18 of 21 races and was again named Harness Horse of the Year. Only 2 other Hambletonian winners, Neville Pride and Mac Lobel, have won back-to-back Horse of the Year honors in the 44 years since Scott Frost's brilliant accomplishment. 8 years after Scott Frost Hambletonian, another Scott appeared on the scene and stepped to greatness. His name was Speedy Scott, and he moved racing writer Ken Rudine of Sports Illustrated to devote 2 full pages in that magazine to the glory of his victory in the 1963 Hambletonian. The finest spectacles in sport, Rudine wrote, are those contests in which great champions win greatly. And in all trotting history, there may have been none finer than last week's Hambletonian. The wondrous Kentucky Bay Speedy Scott triumphed. Now, that was expected, but he did so only when forced to draw upon the last reserves of heart and sinew. That was not expected.
He was so big and so powerful. The analogy that I drew at the same time was to the Cleveland Browns running back, Jim Brown, in that he'd just knock you over, just bowl you over with his sheer strength.
Owned by Castleton Farms, Speedy was the first harness horse to win $200,000 2 years in a row. He was retired to stud duty at Castleton in 1965, and 6 years later, he had a son emulate his success in the sport's most historic race. That was Speedy Crown, the 1971 Hambletonian winner, and a legend on and off the track, where he established himself as the most successful trotting sire of all time. When he started racing as a 2-year-old in 1970, Speedy Crown gave no reason to suspect that there would be anything legendary about him, or profitable for that matter, since he'd won only 4 times in 18 races and earned a pittance of $2,025. Fortunately, his owners had learned 2 years earlier about the rewards of waiting, when their trainer-driver Howard Beisinger gave them a glorious season by winning the 1969 Hambletonian with Lindy's Pride.
But Lindy's Pride coming on, and it's Lindy's Pride winning the Hambletonian, the mile in 1 and 58 and 2/5.
They waited on Speedy Crown, and it was worth the wait. Speedy Crown's racing career, brilliant as it was exceeded by his phenomenal success as a sire. His sons and daughters have won almost $110 million on the racetrack, and they're still winning, including the world's richest harness horse, the $4 million winner, and the international star Moneymaker. Speedy Crown died at 32 in the far reaches of longevity for racehorses. He was buried at the Hall of Fame of the Trotter in Goshen, New York. All of the trotters discussed have reached the pinnacle of greatness in and after the Hambletonian, but all of them were overshadowed by the towering figure of a great gray ghost who won the race before any one of them was born. He was Greyhound, the supreme trotter of the breed, a horse so majestic, so magnificent, so phenomenal that he stood apart and above all the rest. He was born in Kentucky in 1932 on the same farm that sent out the Thoroughbred Classic winner, Exterminator. And he was purchased as a yearling the next Depression year for $900 by Colonel E.J. Baker, who later owned another Hambletonian winner in Volo Song.
He was really an unforgettable horse, and people would come out to see Greyhound when maybe they didn't have that much interest in harness racing, but they knew a celebrity. Maybe it was the Gretzky, the Michael Jordan. It was the one harness horse that everyone knew about, and he kept harness racing alive during much of the Depression.
Greyhound showed promise as a 2-year-old, winning 12 of 18 races for the master horseman Sepp Palin, who drove him throughout his entire racing career. He was unbeaten at 3, winning 8 straight races, highlighted by the Hambletonian, where he swept from last place to first.
Oh, I can see him in front of me right now. And I was only 5 years old. And he just won the Hambletonian. And my father was with me, had me at Goshen with him. And Jimmy Wingfield was the groom. And I can remember my dad asked Jimmy if I could sit on his back when he was cooling out. And Jimmy said, sure. So put me up, and I walked round and round while Jimmy was cooling out Greyhound. It was just wonderful. I've carried that memory all my life.
I don't like to use the word awesome because it's an overworked word, but he actually was. His stride measured something like 26, 27 feet, and he gave the look of fluid grace and power in action.
Turf historian John Hervey wrote, "He seemed to gather and poise himself when he set sail like some splendid ship with all her canvas spread, moving majestically onward, the rhythm of his progress sustained from wire to wire, in so stately a way that it left the spectator with an impression of something invincible." Among those spectators were some Italian horsemen who came to America hoping to arrange a match race between Greyhound and the exported American trotter Muscletone, who was racing brilliantly in Europe. But after seeing Greyhound in action, they left quickly and quietly without a challenge. The Great Gelding lost his first race in 1936 as a 4-year-old and was never beaten again for the next 4 years before his retirement in 1940. Out of competition, he gave exhibitions around the country. In 1939, he was hitched as a team with the 1936 Hambletonian winner, Rosalind, and the pair thrilled a crowd at the New York State Fair in Syracuse with a world record performance. In his final racing appearance, he was ridden under saddle to still another world record by Frances Dodge, later Ms. Frederick Van Lennep, mistress of Castleton Farm. Greyhound retired in 1940 with 15 world records to his credit.
He is still the standard by which all the subsequent champions are measured.
Greyhound died in 1965 at the age of 33, still proud and regal, still monarch of all he surveyed, and still the king of world trotting.
For the greatest competitors, there's no separation between their sport and their life. So focused are some on their goal to win, to finish first, that at times it seems that they're driven by destiny across a finish line that separates the triumph from the tragedy. Their names are as synonymous with the Hambletonian as this silver bowl itself. 4 men who held a soft and magical touch on the reins. Their hands conveyed more than what 1,000 words could ever say, coaxing just the right effort out of their horses with timing so deft it made them Hambletonian legends. Each of these men is responsible for 5 Hambletonian triumphs. Victories so powerful and moving that they resonated throughout the harness racing world and left an indelible impression.
Ben White was the first. He ruled the race when soft caps and spoke sulky wheels were the order of the day. White would drive 4 Hambletonian winners and train another, but nothing ever came close to the flood of emotions that the 1936 race produced. In the heart of the Great Depression, it was just the kind of story that America needed. Her name was Rosalind, and she would prove to be a savior. Her arrival one Kentucky morning in 1933 could not have been better timed. On the other side of the country, in an Arizona hospital, the lungs of a young man were being ravaged by one of the era's deadliest diseases. His name was Gib White, and he had tuberculosis. Minutes seemed like hours as Gib fought a disease that was slowly wearing down his will, and recuperating in the dry Arizona heat alone was not enough to save him. Ben White knew just the medicine that his horse-loving son needed, a baby filly of Gib's very own. The young man named her Rosalind, after a character in Shakespeare's As You Like It. Gib directed her routine from his hospital bed through countless letters to his father, and Rosalind proved to be a powerful tonic. One letter promised that Ben would drive Rosalind the Hambletonian. And by the time Rosalind turned 3, her exploits on the track were already legendary. When she pulled into Goshen in August of 1936, she was not only ready to fulfill Ben's promise to race in the Hambletonian, but she was as well the co-favorite. A record 45,000 packed Good Time Park that day, many simply hoping for a happy ending to this compelling tale. From the roof of the grandstand, a tall, lanky figure watched the race unfold with renowned radio broadcaster Clem McCarthy, who was working for NBC. For the first time, the race was being aired coast to coast. Rosalind would not disappoint. After she dominated both heats, the pencil-thin figure on the roof scrambled breathlessly to make his way down to greet the winner. Once there, Gib White wrapped his arms around his father's neck as tears rose in Ben's 63-year-old eyes. "I guess I'm the happiest fellow in the world," Gib said. "I have a great filly and a great dad." The story even became a classic children's book named Born to Trot, written by award-winning author Marguerite Henry. But there was much more to Ben White's Hambletonian legacy than Rosalind. And his exploits in the 20s, 30s, and 40s earned him the moniker the Dean of Colt Trainers. White was already 53 when the inaugural Hambletonian was held in 1926. His entry that year, a filly named Charm, finished fourth. The following year, White scored his first Hambletonian triumph, albeit just as a trainer. The filly's name was Iasola's Worthy. White would drive his first Hambletonian winner in 1933. It was yet another filly, and her name was Mary Reynolds. In 1942 and 43, White delivered back-to-back Hambletonian triumphs. In 42, it was a colt named the Ambassador who produced an upset victory. Actor Jimmy Cagney presented the trophy to owner Bill Strang. The next year, White won with a favorite, a remarkable colt called Volo's Song. It would be White's last Hambletonian victory. In 1949, at the age of 76, Ben White drove in the classic race for the last time. But that race was notable for another reason. It was the first Hambletonian drive for a 26-year-old man from upstate New York who would become a legend. On that day, Bill Houghton's colt, Crossbow, did not even finish his heat, and it would be an excruciating 25 years before Houghton would finally hold his holy grail aloft. But by the time his life was cut short by a racing accident in 1986, Houghton was as synonymous with the Hambletonian in its Middle Ages as Ben White had been in the early years. No Hambletonian resonated more than the one in 1980. Bill Houghton was 57.
If any race ever personified the word bittersweet, that was it.
Burgermeister belonged to Houghton's son Peter, one of the brightest rising stars in the harness racing industry. Peter was blessed with two of his father's greatest traits, a God-given talent with horses and a gentlemanly charm that made him one of the most beloved figures in the sport.
Billy had seen himself in Peter. He had seen a successor to the king.
Peter picked the colt out as a yearling and then insisted that Burgermeister be brought along slowly.
And Peter had always said that this is, Mom, this is my Hambletonian horse.
But in January of 1980, late one night after the races, on an icy stretch of road, Peter lost control of his Mercedes. Peter Houghton was killed instantly. He was only 25.
And after Peter died, Bill really couldn't go near the horse for a month or so. And I said, Bill, this is foolish. And he, like, started to go to train and to jog Burgermeister. And then he did become obsessed with trying to get this horse to the Hambletonian.